Rostov 41, Race to the Dawn. The title kind of gives away the topic, doesn't it? War games often do that. So, we are in World War II, Eastern Front. This is a two-player game, but it is also perfectly playable solitaire by a single player controlling both sides at the best of their possibilities. You just switch from the Soviets to the Germans and back and forth and see what happens, and you see the action develop. This is part of the Standard Combat series by MMP, also known as the Gamers, by the older among us. And it's a series that I like very much, especially now in times of pandemic when I'm so mentally exhausted from doing my job and at the same time homeschooling my kids. In the evening when I play a war game, well, first time by myself because my human opponents, I cannot meet with them because I like them and so I want to protect them. And also I just can't stand complicated rule sets. The Standard Combat is perfect because it was designed to start to it to be introductory level, to be very simple. And this game is no exception. Actually, within the system, it is one of the purest, one of the most straightforward, because each game in the system relies on the same core of very simple, very classic, old-school ideas, plus some unique rules. And this title specifically has almost no extra rules. The extra rule book is almost just the scenarios, and very few things have been added. Other games in the system add a lot more. Say, I recently reviewed another one that adds an entire chit pool mechanic. Not here. You just get some weather, barrages, unit reinforcements, unit constructions, and that's pretty much it. So this is a perfect game for newer gamers, perfect for beginners, or perfect for seasoned war gamers like me who just don't have the stamina anymore. The situation, again, we are around Rostov. The Germans are on the offensive. Also, it is a game that is very manageable, not just because of the simple rules, but because of the simple logistics. For example, single map, but it's more than enough to have a lot of action, a lot of different things going on. Lower counter density, you have a single sheet of counters, and half of those are disorganization markers, and so you have a fairly low number of units, but again enough to have several foci of actions, enough to have several actions going on at the same time. Not quite enough to protect your entire front, and that's very important. You have several short scenarios, but then you have the main scenario, which is probably going to be the one that you want to play the most. It's probably going to be the main course here. The main scenario starts with the Germans in this area of the map here, ready to threaten this city here, and on their way to Rostov, which really is the jewel of the crown here. And you're gonna have some Soviet units scattered around here. There in the back, you have some garrison units in Rostov. And it's all about the geography, really, because the game is based on victory points that are earned by taking control of locations on the map. They have different amounts of points. Rostov by itself is 15 if the German player controls it by the end of the game. But then you have smaller prizes, sort of door prizes all around. Stalino is 3 points. Malokyaslovzhilovo, that's exactly how you pronounce it, is worth 2 points, etc., etc. It's scattered all around. The geography is the thing, because early on it's pretty easy for the German player to push and hurt the Soviet player a lot, to threaten Rostov, to spread out and capture some of those secondary objectives. But then things start happening. In particular, you have Soviet reinforcements coming out of that area up there, and they can threaten supply lines. And so you simply have, as a German player, to start scattering your units. You're diluting your punching power to make sure you're not surrounded, and therein lies the conundrum. Also, geography is the thing and weather is the other. Weather is very important. We start the game with clear weather, then we have a turn where we roll a die to see whether we get mud or not, but mud happens, will happen. We may have another period of clear, some clear weather, and then deep freeze again. Partially variable, partially it's gonna happen, deal with it. And the mud is simply gonna be devastating, especially for the German player. Is you're really gonna get stuck in there. There are more Soviet units that are not affected by it, but everybody is. But again, it's worth for the German player, because the German player is the one on the offensive, is the one that is gonna be slowed down. Deep freeze also has negative effects, not quite as devastating as mud. For example, in deep freeze, you can move across major rivers. The major river on the board is impassable, with the exception of deep freeze. So this is gonna change the game quite a bit. Again, the German player needs to make as much progress as possible early on, before the geography forces you to stretch your lines and your front a little too much, before the weather becomes your worst enemy, and also before the Soviets bring in a massive number of units. They're small, they're weak, but it's a lot of them. That's just the parable of the Eastern Front. If you play games with this topic, I'm sure this is not news to you. You may have seen this happen before. As for the game itself, it's classic, truly classic, standard combat series. We have units with 3 main values on them, which is attack, defense, and movement. If the unit has a yellow box around the printed values, then the unit is capable of exploitation. Artillery also has a small number printed there, which is the range of their barrage. Some units have a white movement factor that indicates that they're not affected by mud, and so that's another important element. Again, the game is as classic as you can imagine. You're gonna roll dice at the beginning of each turn to determine who the initiative player is. That is, who's gonna be first player and who's gonna be second player. The first player also gets a variable number of airstrike markers that can be used as artillery barrage, basically. Then you are gonna have the I go, you go kind of sequence. That there's the first player is gonna receive reinforcements, the German player gets a barrage phase, then you're gonna have movement, barrage, and combat. Barrage does not typically or easily destroy units. Most of what it does, it disorganizes them. Then disorganized units will get back at the end of the turn. Those are removed, but they may be destroyed before that happens. The point, in fact, of barrage is precisely to disorganize units. Disorganized units have all their values halved, and once they're deorganized, then you move in and you attack. So the basic, with some barrage elements here and there, the basic formula is still I go, you go, move and attack. And then the active player may also perform exploitation movement with exploitation-capable units that are not adjacent to enemy units. And also we have overrun attacks that can be part of regular movement and exploitation movement. You simply spend some extra points, movement points, to attack as part of movement. Combat is resolved using a combat table based on combat odds. The total attack factors of the attacker divided by the total defense factors of the defender, as possibly modified by terrain. You find the right column, roll 2 dice, cross-reference, and you will have a number of steps lost by the attacker or by the defender, attacker or defender, and then if it's an R, then you have a number of retreats that again the defender or the attacker may have to take. Say here, attack loses 1 step and retreats by 1. You can also convert retreats into step losses if you want to go all the no retreat way. And this is pretty much the general idea. Oh, one thing, when an infantry unit is removed, there is a chance that it'll get back later. You roll a die. If you roll 4 to 6, the unit is gone for good out of the game. But if you roll 1 to 3, then you put the unit on the turn track that many turns ahead. 1 is next turn. 2 turns ahead. And that unit will come back then as reinforcement, which means, again, that all things being equal, the Soviets have better chances of bringing back their units over and over and over and over again. This is, in essence, how you play Rostov 41. Classic Aigo-Yugo with very few touches, very few elements added to the classic standard combat series system. I'm growing old and grumpy, and that has been a process going on. Has just sped up recently because of the pandemic. You know, the last 6 months lasted about 6 years in terms of toll, and so a game as simple as Rostov 41 is exactly the kind of war game that I want to play and that I can play. I'm looking at my collection, some games that I was just happy to play 2-3 years ago. I can't begin to imagine reading the rulebook now, let alone absorbing it and actually then playing the game. Rostov 41 is the kind of game that I want and I can play because it has a simple system that I already know, even better, but there's still a lot of meat there. There's still a lot of flavor, a lot of different options because the narrative, because the challenges that you have are interesting on both sides. As the German player, you know the bad weather is coming, you know you have to push as much as you can early on, but you also know that by concentrating your forces, you're leaving your flanks exposed, you're leaving your lines of supplies exposed, which can be, of course, huge problems. So you have a nice dilemma there. As the Russian player, you're biding your time at the beginning, biting the bullet, getting pummeled in the face, but I must say, not as much as I expected. This is not like one of those games about the bulge in which if you're the Allies at the beginning, the first couple of turns, you're just gonna sit there and get destroyed and nothing else. You can put up a decent defense just by exploiting terrain and putting the units that have good defense factors in certain locations. You can put up a decent defense. It's not trivial. It's not just mindless, you know, getting just into like a blender of German attacks the first couple of turns. It's not obvious. Even then, when the German player has the upper hand, is not an overpowerful hand. And then, of course, things turn around as Soviet reinforcements keep crawling out of the woodwork here and there, threatening those supply lines, threatening encirclements, forcing the German player to stretch the front. And so actually there are a lot of interesting decisions. You have definitely an architecture that's also interesting. It's not 14 times 14 turns the same thing because the situation changes overall. It has a nice overarching sense of progression. And in each phase of the game you have interesting decisions for both players. Again, it has a general narrative, German attack, moment of stall, Soviet counterattack. But as I said, is not as dramatic as in other games in which you come from one side being totally overpowerful at the beginning and then being completely overpowered at the end. It really is a matter of nuance, and to me that is very interesting, very fun. Again, I'm a point in life where I like a game that I already know how to play, and this particular installment in the Standard Combat Series system is also very welcome to me because the extra rules, the unique rules, are so basic. One thing, the production is just what you expect from MMP with, you know, paper map that is just a paper map. It's nothing deluxe, but it gets the job done. Counters are, again, nothing glamorous, but they're just thick enough. They look nice enough. One thing that I found missing here was in the fact that you score points for the German player based on control of cities. and you control them by sitting there, which I understand that, or being the last player who was there. That also makes sense, but the game doesn't come with any control markers. So actually, either you have a piece of paper in which you write down that the German was the last player to be in Stalino or in whatever other city, or you repurpose control markers, with axes maybe and Soviet symbols from other games. It's unusual that a game in which you had to keep track of where people have been doesn't have any marker to do that. Again, you can repurpose their barrage markers, maybe you can reuse those. It's just a weird thing that I did not expect. Other than that, and then nothing to complain about because this is a very solid game. Excellent for beginners, excellent for times of pandemic when your human opponent is not there, because you can control both sides to the best of your possibilities and still have a lot of fun trying to solve these puzzles that keep emerging on both sides at every point of the story. So Rostov 41, a really, really solid new entry in a proven system.